Hi, I'm Celia Boothman, founder of LTR Coaching, and I'd like to welcome you to the Inspired Triathletes podcast, where I'll be bringing you stories from female triathletes and taking on topics that are important to women in the sport. So today I'm sharing my story to give you a bit of background onto how and why I got into triathlon, why I created LTR Coaching, what LTR stands for, and also why I started this podcast. So my background in triathlon is not a linear one. Some people seem to think I just emerged as a fully formed triathlete, but the same as many of you, I haven't had a linear path into triathlon. It's something that has developed along the way. I've always been active and I've always loved being outdoors, but it wasn't until I had my first son that I decided to take on a triathlon. I joined a running club in the local area and we were new to the area, but I wanted another challenge that would allow me to do different sports. And as I said, we'd recently moved to this new area and I was trying to make new friends as well. So we were at a running event and I saw the Tri Club at this running event and I thought it could be a good way to meet new people. And this Tri crowd looked a little bit younger than the running club. No offense to the running club, but they were a bit younger and more my age range. So I thought it would be a good thing to do socially. And so what I started to do was to go to the swim sessions in an evening. They were quite late. It was quite a struggle for me sometimes to get out, but it was my time that I could just dedicate to myself after having my son. I would go to the Tri Club swim session and it was my time for me. So triathlon was a familiar concept to me. I'd heard of triathlons and I'd considered it before, but I also dismissed it as it was too much training. I'd trained for a half marathon before and I thought that was hard enough. How would I train for a triathlon? It was a ridiculous amount of time. I didn't want to spend time really training. I wasn't that serious about sport at the time. I just wanted to go out and enjoy stuff and enjoy being outdoors. But after I'd been pregnant and I had a new baby, I really needed to carve out a little bit of time for myself. And so training for a triathlon seemed to be one way that I could do that. So the triathlon club at the time used to do a super sprint, which was aimed at getting people into the sport. And I started training for that super sprint. As I said, I used to go to the Tri Club on, I think it was a Monday night. I used to do my swim session. And when I went to the pool with my mum and my little boy, we used to take turns in swimming in the pool then. And I used to run and cycle outside of that. My mum and my husband were very, very supportive and they helped me immensely in training in those early days. So when it came time for me to do that super sprint triathlon, I did pretty well and I was quite proud of myself. I think I won like the best novice athlete. That event was a pool triathlon event, and I remember being quite worried about what I was going to wear at the time. I remember having my swimming costume on and wanting to put on a t-shirt when I came out of the pool and shorts over the top. I didn't have any kit. I just wore like a swimming costume and then shorts and t-shirt over the top. And I think I came out worrying so much about the transition and not touching my bike before I'd got my helmet on, that I put my helmet on before I put my t-shirt on and then couldn't get my t-shirt over my head. So I was quite worried about all these little things in transition. And also hearing all these time trial bikes zooming past me. I was on my hybrid clunky bike at the time. But I did it and I felt really strong on the run because I came from a running background. And I realized that when I finished the race, I felt really strong, like, that's amazing. I did swim, bike and run. I felt so proud of myself and a bit of a hero, really. And also I realized that if I did invest a little bit more time in training, then I probably could get quite good at the sport. So I read a few books on how to train, and I followed some plans and gradually worked my way up through the distances of triathlon. So at first I stuck to sprint and standard distance with 2 small children. It was really all I could manage. And I swore that I would never do an Ironman. It just seemed ridiculous to me. I remember a couple of women in the Tri Club talking about it, and they were saying, oh, you wait, you'll be working your way up through the distances, you'll be doing an Ironman, it gets addictive, and this, that, and the other. And I thought, no, there's no way that I want to do that. They said it was only a matter of time, and I thought, no, it's ridiculous. Running a marathon after all that cycling and swimming, it's too much. There was no way that I would ever going to do that. But around 7 years later, Ironman Wales appeared on our doorstep, and I saw the athletes ride through the town that I live in. And then at that point, the desire to do Ironman was really seeded in my head. I remember seeing women come through the the feed stations, and knowing that how many months they must have prepared for this event, how much commitment they must have put in. And it was their race day, they were enjoying the day, the kind of atmosphere up there was amazing. I'd never seen anything like it, so I decided I wanted to do this. And so my pathway was to do a 70.3 first, because I felt that that would help build me up to a full Ironman distance. I had a little bit more time to train because my children were a little bit older. And the race that I decided to do was on Exmoor. It was 70.3 Wimbleball. It was a lake swim. I was really worried about the cold. The race has been dropped now. It doesn't happen anymore. But we stayed in an Airbnb which had a church outside whose bells were ringing every 15 minutes during the night. So I didn't get any sleep the night before. And I remember crying in the night because I just couldn't get any sleep. I was so worried about this event, worried about the swim, worried about the cold. It poured with rain the whole day. I was worried about what to wear. So I was in a pretty stressed state. I was very nervous. But when it got to race day, I decided I was going to, layer up. And I did get a bit cold on the bike, but it was fine. But it was pretty bad weather, and then I finished in around 4th place on that event. So again, I was happy. I thought, I could improve a little bit here maybe if I was pushed, but I was super happy to finish that race and feel strong at the end of it. That 70.3 was really a stepping stone to my first Ironman, Ironman Wales, as I've said, which I did in 2014. So I coached myself for the event, and again I came 4th in my age group. And I thought if I had a little bit of coaching myself, maybe it would push me a little bit more. And in 2016 I did Ironman Wales again with the goal of qualifying for Kona. And I did get a coach this time, as I knew I needed someone really to push me harder than I was able to do myself at the time. So I won my age group in Wales, and I raced Kona in 2017. The year after, I qualified for Xterra by winning my age group, and in 2022 I won my age group at Swansea 70.3 and qualified for the Worlds there as well. So really I wanted to talk a little bit about my background and how my background helped me to get into the sport of triathlon and feel confident and happy in those environments. So my first experience of really being good at something was when our PE teacher in primary school made us run cross country. So he made us run cross country in the woods in the pouring rain. You're noticing a theme here about the rain. And at the end of the session, the teacher pulled my friend and me to the side and he told us that we did really well. We'd caught up with many of the boys, and he asked if we'd be interested in running in races. He told us that we'd probably be the only girls in the events, because where I lived at that time, I lived in Devon, there wasn't a girls cross country league. It was probably in the early 80s. I was quite young. Our age just didn't have a league. He also warned us that we would probably come last or near last a lot of the time in these races. But for some reason, I was quite keen to do this, and I went along to the races. My friend was not so keen. So often I was the only girl on the bus on the way to these events. And I remember sitting in the back of the bus, just being quite lonely. No one was really talking to me. And I also came near the back at many of those races. I desperately didn't want to come last. And in one way, this built up my confidence and it built up my resilience, but it was also a little bit demoralizing when I knew that I wasn't competing against fair competition. I didn't have girls to compete against at that time. I can vividly remember one race where I was in second to last place. I knew there was a boy behind me, and I lost my shoe in the mud on the last lap. I was wearing these shoes that had a Velcro strap across them, so really not ideal for muddy cross-country races. But my shoe came off in this mud that was really deep, and I could see that this boy in last place was catching me, and if I stopped to pick up my shoe and try and put it back on, he would catch me. And so I just left my shoe and ran as fast as I could to the finish, just made it in before him, just because I really didn't want to come last. And in secondary school then I took that cross-country running, but I was also lucky enough to try out a lot of different sports and activities. I did continue running in cross-country and also in athletics. And this was until I started gaining a bit of weight in puberty. I noticed that I was finding it a lot harder to get in the top 3 in races, because that's where I used to come usually. And I just stopped running competitively. But instead of running competitively, I used running in a bit of an unhealthy way to keep weight off, along with some pretty bad or unhealthy eating habits, which I don't really want to get into here, but I went through a bit of a bad patch with training and not really having self-confidence in that last few years of my school. When I left school, I then worked as an outdoor instructor for a little while. So I was one of the few female instructors in the centres that I worked in. And also at university, I started to work part-time in the climbing wall, which again was another male environment. And at the time, I was really proud of myself being able to hold my own in this environment, being one of the boys. And I tried to hide my feminine side just to fit in with the men. But it could be lonely at times because I didn't always have anyone to share my feelings with. I didn't often connect with the women I was working with. They were quite often older than me. And we also all had to hold our own in those environments. So it was quite difficult to bond sometimes. So all of that background helped me to get into triathlon and be comfortable, I suppose, in a male-dominated environment. Because although we say triathlon is really inclusive and fair, and we have equal opportunities for both genders, the men and women race together, it really isn't when you go to a race. There's a lot more men than women in the races. And a lot of the training that you do will be with mostly men. So I set up my coaching company in 2014 after I'd done my first Ironman. I had a lot of experience coaching myself, and I started to get my coaching qualifications at that point. And LTR, I want to tell you what it stands for. It stands for Love the Rain, and that is in a literal and a metaphorical way. So I live in Wales, and we have to train in the rain quite a lot. And I also saw how training for endurance events had helped me grow as a person And also to learn that when things go wrong, that we are struggling in some way, it's also a sign that we're evolving and growing. So as I said, although triathlon is a welcoming sport, I was aware that I was in a minority in a lot of races. And also when I used to do time trialing for training for my events, I was usually one of the few women there. As I said, it wasn't really a problem for me because I'd been used to being one of the only girls doing the sport. But as I learned to be a triathlon coach, I was focusing on all of the things that are written and talked about in the triathlon press. I thought these topics were really important to know about, but there was a huge gap here and I had many unanswered questions. And this is because the majority of coaches and athletes are male. So the triathlon world is focused on seeing things through a male lens. And the things that female triathletes want to know are addressed less, sometimes relegated to a bit less important than metrics, data, and the latest gadget. I'm not saying these things are unimportant, but I'm just saying there's a bit less, there's a big focus on the things that men find interesting, but not necessarily so much focus on what women find interesting. So in 2016, when I was training for Ironman Wales the second time around, with the goal of qualifying for Kona, I started to really question some of the advice and think about things from a female perspective. I guess I tried to ignore that part of me because I had come from these male-dominated environments, and I thought it was pretty normal to be trying to be more like a man to fit into these environments. Around this time, in 2016, the book Raw came out by Dr. Stacey Sims, and it answered some of my questions and made me realize how much we were missing in women's sports. And I really wanted to help women to see that they could take part in these type of events and really thrive within the sport. So I immersed myself in these topics. I took several of Dr. Stacey Sims' courses so that I could coach women better and really connect and understand the things that we were interested in. It helps being a woman, but I also found a lot of information that I hadn't necessarily thought about because I was blinkered with this male approach or male lens of it all. I also noticed when doing research and things like that some forums and spaces could have been a little bit more helpful for female triathletes. Some of them had unhelpful advice or comments. I wanted to create a space where women could ask questions like, what do you do if you have your period on race day? How does perimenopause affect your training? Things about sports bras, how to fuel well, all without fear of being ridiculed or made fun of. And I wanted to give women the support they needed to grow as an athlete. So I talked a little bit about periods there, and it's something that I'm really interested in because when I started training for a triathlon, I did start tracking my menstrual cycle. I had become more aware of it because when I was trying to get pregnant, I was tracking it, but I hadn't really considered its impact on my training. And it was something that I'd just tried to ignore in the past as I didn't want it to affect me. But ironically, when we try and ignore something, it can sometimes make things worse. So I sometimes found symptoms were worse because I was frustrated and angry with the hormones affecting me. I wanted to just get on with it and push through. So I would give myself a hard time sometimes if I wasn't feeling great, as if I should be able to just push it to the side. So I started tracking, as I said, using an app called Hormone Horoscope. It was one of the early tracking apps. And I also recommended it to my female clients. They then reported that knowing how their cycle affected them in different phases was really helpful. And so in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I decided to focus just on coaching female triathletes, as I knew I could serve them a lot better if I focused solely on women. Also, I really enjoyed coaching women more. It's much easier to communicate, we connect better. And it's also important for me to see women gain confidence and to learn about themselves in their triathlon journey. That's part of what I love about it, is seeing that progression for people. I set up Team Love the Rain that year to provide structured training and plans and support and a community for women in triathlon. And I've loved helping the athletes that I coach to become stronger, more resilient through training and racing. So I'm going to draw this to a close now, but if you do want to find out more about the team and get news about LTR coaching, then subscribe to my newsletter and you'll get a heads up when any new podcasts are released, and you'll also get links to articles and content that you'll love. And if you have any questions for me, because this is an extension of my coaching network, then please let me know and I can include them in future podcasts. Thanks for listening today. Have a great day. Take care. Bye for now.